As the title suggests, this will be me recommending 20 video games, which I just want to say before I actually get into the recommendations, that I was inspired by a video that I saw by Colleen Manga Rex, where she recommended 30 manga for her 30th birthday. So the main idea came from her, and of course I'll link the video and her channel in the description, and if you like manga, specifically Shojo manga, then you might find her videos interesting, but yeah, so that's where I got this idea. So I'm going to be turning 20, and by the time this video comes out, I will be 20. I'll come out on my birthday. So I just wanted to recommend 20 games. I don't know, it seemed like a fun idea, and once again, thanks to Colleen for making that video that I just happened to see, and I was like, oh, I want to maybe do that. That seems fun. There won't be really an order to these. It's not like my least favorite to my most favorite. I guess if anything, those will be the last like 5 or so that I recommend that are like truly my favorite games. And some of these I haven't even finished myself, but I just thought they were super interesting and like compelling, but most of them I have completely finished. And due to how long this video could be, I'm not going to go super in depth, because if I was spending a lot of time on one thing and there's 20 things, it'll take forever. And so yeah, not everything will be super in depth, and some things will have more than others. So to start, this game is kind of difficult to get your hands on. You're going to have to emulate it. Figure that out. It's Haunting Ground, which is a game by Capcom from around like the early 2000s, which actually kind of spawned from original Resident Evil 4. It's about a girl named Fiona who gets in an accident and finds herself in a castle, and it's kind of pseudo-survival horror, but you're kind of defenseless. But it's just super interesting, and I think there's a lot of great ideas in that game, and it has one of the best dogs in gaming, Huey. Following this, I want to talk about Unpacking, which is just a super cute and cozy game about unpacking, and there's not really much to it besides that, but there's a lot of great environmental storytelling, and it has a really cute art style, and it's like if you were stressed or something, I reckon it would be a fantastic game for something like that to decompress. This is a classic that probably everyone has played, but I felt like recommending it anyways because it's endless fun. Left 4 Dead 2, which you could play the first one, but the first one is in the second one, so there's no point. It's just endless fun. You can play it with friends, by yourself. There's plenty of game modes. I can't remember the name of it, but there's one where you basically just survive as long as you can. And that's always fun. I can't do better than like 8 minutes. But outside of that, it's just a really fun game, and like I said, most people probably played it, but I just thought it was worth recommending because it's a classic. Another one I really love, it's an indie game, which a couple of these are actually, in hindsight, is Before Your Eyes, which is a super inspired and just phenomenal and interesting game about watching someone's life. But the catch is that when you blink, time passes. Hey, Future Kellen here. I just want to clarify that I literally mean when you blink in real life, time passes in the game. It uses your webcam to tell when you blink, and then time will skip ahead. I just thought I didn't make that clear enough. You also don't need to play with a webcam, but I recommend if you do play this game, if you have a webcam or a camera, 100% play it the first time using your webcam to get the full experience, and then you can go back after if you don't want to actually have to blink, and you can experience everything the game has to offer. Okay, back to the video. And it's kind of like bittersweet in that sense that like you play and you will blink and time will just pass, but you don't fully see everything. Like, it's impossible to see everything, and you can't forever stay in that moment, and that's what life is. And I think it's just a super beautiful game that is worth playing, and it's pretty short. It's only like $10 though, so which that shouldn't matter. The game's length shouldn't be dependent on its price, but it's short, which I think it's good. Its length is like perfect for what it wants to be. But yeah, it's $10. I highly recommend it. It's not for everyone, but I think it's super cool, and like, I don't know, it was just so touching, and I think it's really worth exploring, because it just touches on the general ideas of life in a super cool way. The next game is Liza P, which a lot of people probably have played. I think I've not finished it. I'm really close to the end, but I think it's like the perfect distillation of like someone trying to do Souls-like that does it the best. That isn't From Software. And it's just a really great game with a lot of interesting ideas, and I think a really cool telling of Pinocchio. That's the P, that's the puppet, Pinocchio. And it's just super cool, and like I said, it's trying to be Souls-like a Souls game, but I think it does it in a really great way. The only complaint I really have, and I want to mention it specifically for this, is that I think a lot of it isn't telegraphed amazingly. And that's like the thing that you play, well, not the thing that you play them for, but a main part of From Software games. But this, I don't know, it's a lot of pairing, so it's kind of like Bloodborne and Sekiro together, but I just think it's super fun so far, and I'm almost done, like I said. And so if you're looking for a Souls game that isn't a Souls game, I would recommend Liza P. The next game is 1,000 Times Resist, which is a game that came out a couple months ago. It's also an indie game that is really just basically a story-driven game with, like, on paper, like, no gameplay. So it's almost like a visual novel, and it's fully voiced. And it just was a super interesting story about, like, generational trauma and, like, uprisings and the idea of, like, people trying to make their voices heard and kind of how history repeats itself. And I don't think it does everything perfectly, but it's an indie game that, like, obviously, like, it can't do everything perfectly, but I think it tries to tell its story in a super compelling and interesting way that, for me, I thought was super cool. I believe, I don't remember exactly what chapter it is specifically, but I think chapter 5 was my favorite chapter in the game, but I don't want to, like, talk about what chapter 5 was, but it's just a super cool game about history repeating and generational trauma, and I think it's technically 3 playable characters. But if you pick it up, you'll definitely, like, potentially see the appeal, but there's so much to it that I don't want to really talk about what a lot of it has to say, because I think people have made those videos, hopefully, if it's gotten that attention that it deserves. But also, it's so worth playing yourself that I think it's better not talking about it. The next game I want to talk about is Hades, which is just a roguelike game that probably a lot of people have played, but I really love it. I haven't played Hades 2 yet, but I'm sure I'll decently love it as well. But there's a time where there was like a week or two that I was just addicted to Hades, and roguelike games usually aren't my cup of tea, but this game just really worked for me. Maybe it's to do with, like, the art style as well. But yeah, it's just super fun. Like, if you know roguelikes, there's not much I can say here about it. It's just a really fun game that's, I don't know, I wanted to recommend it because it's super fun. The next game I want to talk about is called Crow Country, which is a newer indie game as well that is very PS1 style graphics. It's survival horror, which is, like, my favorite genre, I suppose. And I haven't played much of it. I'm not very far in the game at all, but I already know that, like, I'm going to love it. I just love the presentation, and it's graphically, it's almost like classic Final Fantasy, like Final Fantasy VII. And it's just, like I said, like, it's classic, like, PS1 style, and it's just super cool. You play as a detective named Mara Forrest, who is going to investigate this amusement park called Crow Country. And that's really all I want to say about it. I know a little bit more from what I played, but if you like survival horror or, like, more retro style games, huge recommend, even though I'm only, like, a couple hours in. Next is Little Nightmares, which is fairly popular, but I really love Little Nightmares. I guess this encompasses 2 and 1 for me, but I'll specifically just, I don't know, the franchise as a whole, I know, which is technically 2 games, but I'm not going to count, I'm going to count it as 1 for this, the purpose of this. But I just think they're super cool, like, visually, and I love the presentation, and they got that, like, that perfect, like, atmospheric, like, eeriness to them. And the 3rd one's coming out sometime next year, which will be co-op, so if you're more of a co-op player, maybe, you can check that out. But I just love the world of Little Nightmares. It's perfectly creepy and intriguing at the same time. The next one is a looter shooter. This is probably one of the most beloved games of all time, but I just felt like recommending it because I didn't really have anything like this on my list initially, but I also love this game. Borderlands 2, which, what is there to say about Borderlands 2 that hasn't been said? But, despite that, I think it's such a fun game, especially when you're playing with people, from my experience. But if you get, like, the Enhancement Collection, you can get pretty much, like, all the games super cheap, assuming it's on sale. But it's just, I don't know, it's worth checking out, especially if you saw the horrible movie. You should probably actually play a good version of this game, and that is Borderlands 2, especially. It's amazing. For this next game, this isn't my favorite title from the series, but I thought it was the one that is easiest to recommend to people because it's so accessible. It's newer, and that's Devil May Cry 5. Devil May Cry 5 is a phenomenal game. It's just not my favorite, but because it's on, like, every platform, and it's definitely the easiest to learn, and it looks great, and it plays great, and it sounds great, all the things that make a game good, it's the one I would recommend to people. Or, like, you should play it and then work backwards, which is kind of what I did. But 3 is my favorite, if you are curious. But 5 is the one that if you've never played, start with 5. And then maybe try, like, the first 3 and then go to 4. But definitely 5 is great. So I think everyone would love 5 if they're kind of into like hack and slash, like action games that aren't like, you know, nothing like a Souls like, for example. It's, you know, you're just playing, you have fun, you try to get the combos. The next game I want to recommend is also survival horror. I debated about what I wanted, like which from the series I wanted to recommend, and I think I'm going to recommend Dead Space Remastered or Remake from 2023. 2 is my favorite, but I've kind of, same thing with Devil May Cry. I had the thought of, well, it's remastered, or it's remade, and you can kind of just recommend it to people on that, because a lot of people might not want to play the older game because it is older. I don't know. It looks great, it plays great, it's just perfect. Kind of atmospheric survival horror, same thing, but it like pretty much, it takes even what the original Dead Space does and kind of elevates it slightly to have more horror aspects, even though Dead Space 1 also has the original Dead Space 1 has its moments of doing what it does, but I don't know, the remake was really good, and besides another remake that came out that year, would have been the best one. So if you're into survival horror, or you are familiar with Dead Space and you haven't played the remake, I mean, it's worth playing if you have interest in that. The next game I want to recommend is one of my favorite games just overall, but I put it just somewhere random in the list, and that's It Takes Two, which did win Game of the Year at the Game Awards a couple years ago. I don't know, I love It Takes Two. It needs to be played with a friend, obviously, it's in the title, but it's about a couple, you know, struggling in their relationship and kind of learning to make peace and grow and like work through some of their problems. But also its presentation is just super fun, and it almost is like a Pixar movie, and it's just, every level is like different, and it's silly and goofy. There's like a Street Fighter reference, like that's just one thing that stands out to me, and it's just like, it's doing all these things and it does them so well. And it's truly like a miracle that like this game got to exist and people loved it and won Game of the Year, and now it's sold like 20 million copies, and you only need one copy. Like if you're playing with a friend, you both don't need to buy it. There's something called the Friends Pass, which I think makes this even easier to recommend, because just one of you buy it, or and you both can play it, or it doesn't have to be a friend. You play it with your dad, your mom, your significant other, obviously, but it's just such a incredible fun game that I think is just so worth playing just for anyone. Like, I don't know, it's just so much fun, and I'm really excited to see what the studio Hazelight does next, and I hope that if you played It Takes Two, or if you end up playing it, that you are looking forward to the next title as well. For this next game, it might have been my favorite game of 2023, and that's Alan Wake 2. This one is tricky to talk about because pretty much anything I say would be a spoiler. But even so, I just want to recommend this game because it's phenomenal. But the problem is, you have to pretty much play Alan Wake 1, or you have to be super familiar with the story of Alan Wake 1, which, like, I kind of played this before playing the first one. I knew a lot about the first one. I played most of it, but I didn't actually finish it. But I wasn't too lost. But you definitely should play both. But specifically, Alan Wake 2 was just phenomenal, and I don't care much for like a game's like actual graphic quality. Like, I think art direction matters more, which Alan Wake 2 has incredible art direction, but it might have been the best looking game in 2023. Like, it looks unreal, it looks like real life. Like I said, for me, it's not something that matters too much, but it just stuck out so much because it just looked phenomenal, and it's just such a good game. But like I said, I can't talk about it like narratively at all, because it reveals too much about the game. But yeah, definitely check it out. It's kind of survival horror-esque, but it's just, its narrative is just so good that, I don't know, look into it, read some reviews, see if that's something you would be into, because I think it is a little bit more niche, maybe. I don't know, it's popular, but I don't know if it's for everyone, especially. The next game is a game that probably everyone has played, but Elden Ring is phenomenal. And there isn't much to say. We're just getting to like my top favorite games at this point for the last few, and Elden Ring was just here. I don't know, Elden Ring is fun. Use big hammer, hit monster. I don't know. Have a good time. And if it's too difficult, just get a better weapon or level up more. There's not much to say. Obviously I felt like I had to recommend it because it's a great game. I don't love the DLC though, hot take, but the base game is phenomenal, but not for everyone. But because it's open world and you can kind of play at your own pace, it can definitely, I think people who might not like it can get more out of it. So I just think that is worth noting. For the next game, which same thing with Haunting Ground, it's a little bit hard to play. You're going to have to emulate it or something, or if you have a copy of it on a PS2. Silent Hill 3, which is my favorite Silent Hill game. Just overall, it's just a great game. It's a phenomenal game about like grief and coming to terms with losing a loved one. But the tricky thing with 3 is, and it made it hard for me to recommend it or put it in this list initially, but I thought I should, is you need to play the first game because they connect, and I think it's important to play the first one before you play 3, whereas like Silent Hill 2 can be played on its own. But in lieu of someone not wanting to play the original Silent Hill 1, I guess I can recommend Silent Hill 2 Remake. It's pretty good. I had a great time with it. The original is better, but if you were like just trying to find a game that's like you just can buy it and play it, Silent Hill 2 Remake is there. But my real recommendation is Silent Hill 3. It's just one of my favorite games. Alright, it's great. But there's so much to unpack with it that like I don't have time for it, and I don't want to because it's just better to experience it yourself. Following that is Nier Automata, which, same thing, is just one of my favorite games, and it's just a very, like, humanist tale, but it's about androids. But I think that's what makes it so compelling, is, like, it's so about humanity, but through the lens of things that aren't human, even if they basically are. But, you know, narratively, you're like, oh, they're androids, and they're not people. But I just think its story is just done in such an interesting, beautiful way, and it has just one of the best soundtracks in gaming. But the gameplay is my biggest gripe with it, but it's one of those things where it's like, it doesn't matter if the gameplay isn't my favorite thing, because I love everything else it's doing, but it's just, I had to throw it on there because I love it so much. And you don't need to play Replicant before you play it. You could play Replicant, then this, or play the Automata, then play Replicant. It doesn't matter, but, you know, Automata is there, and I think people should play it. I don't know, fantastic game. For recommendation 18 and 19, I'm going to do them back to back because they're from the same series, which is something I wasn't going to do, but I just had to because these two games are just phenomenal. So first, I'm going to do Resident Evil Remake from 2002. But specifically, I'm talking about the port that's on PC. It's on PC, console, you can pretty much play it anywhere. The original Resident Evil Remake is phenomenal. It's perfect survival horror. There's 2 playable characters. It's different on both sides. Like one has more HP, one has more slots in the inventory. Like there's just a bunch of other like interactions that don't happen in both playthroughs. It's just phenomenal. And if you're a fan of Resident Evil, like the newer games, and you haven't played this one, you should. And it's just great. There's so much to say, but it's such almost a perfect game for what it is. And yeah, I don't know. It's phenomenal. Definitely play it if you have interest in horror, like some of the other titles, or if you haven't played this one, but you've played like Resident Evil 2 Remake 3, or even like Resident Evil Village or something like that. And then next game I want to recommend, which is also a Resident Evil game, is Resident Evil 4. For Resident Evil 4, I'm talking about both the remake and the original, because I think they're pretty close. The original is better. But when I like recommend it to people, I kind of am recommending either, because I think you can play either one. But realistically, if, you know, I had to say play this one, I would say play the original. But the remake is so good and just different enough, and that it's fun. It works so well, and I think like Nick Apostolides is great. Even though the original voice actor in 4 is also phenomenal, but it was so nice to have Nick back after he did Leon in Resident Evil 2. And the thing with Resident Evil that I think makes it so recommendable to people though, is like you can kind of just jump into any of them, because they do connect in a way, but they're not so like directly connected. Like 2 and 4 probably have the most connective tissue between any of the games. Like there is some through lines that appear in some of the other ones, but they're like the virus strands or something. And like sure, you might not understand or know this character a lot, but I don't think that doesn't really stop you, because like the story of Resident Evil is not super like concise. It's kind of stupid and silly, where it's like the gameplay is the thing you're engaging with, or the characters are what you're engaging with. So yeah, Resident Evil 4, phenomenal game. Play the remake or the original, but I'm going to count them as one, despite which one you play. But if I had to pick one, I would recommend the original if you were open to playing an older game that, you know, had like tank controls and stuff like that. And for the final recommendation, I'm going to recommend my favorite game of 2022, and just probably one of my favorite games of all time, and today I guess I'm feeling like it's my favorite, and that is Signalis by Rose Engine. It's a phenomenal, just like perfect distillation of survival horror in like a PS1 pixel like graphic style, and just phenomenal storytelling. And it's just such an interesting world that is like perfectly eerie, kind of like some of the other games I mentioned. But there's something that this game does that I just find so compelling and interesting and intriguing. And I think it's all of it. It's like the art is good, the like gameplay is good, the story is phenomenal, and like the soundtrack, like all these things perfectly come together to make a game that is like unbelievable. You just like can't even fathom the fact that it was like made by 2 people. Because like you look at it and you're like, what? How did this like perfect game basically come to be? And I don't even want to talk about like what it is narratively. It's the same thing where it's like it's so interesting to like watch this story unravel in front of you. It's a little confusing, but it's so interesting and it's just great. And I recommend it to all my friends, even though they probably find that so annoying. But it's a game I think about pretty much every day. And that's why it's the final thing I want to recommend, because I think it's the thing, like if any of the games on this list, it's the game that I think everyone should play or try to play. So yeah, that's my final recommendation. I don't know, thanks for listening to me ramble about some of the games that I love. Even if I haven't finished some of these. And like I said, some of these aren't even like my top 10 games, they're just games that I think are super interesting or worth recommending. Yeah, so thanks. I mean, that's really all I have to say. Yeah, so thank you for watching.